Okay, so our first item, or our next item on the agenda today is a fireside chat. And John Lane and David Johnson will provide the senior executive perspective on how to make AI work in mature, large global manufacturing organizations. You met David Johnson earlier today, and he provided that great keynote address. John Lane is the Vice President of Information Technology for Operational Excellence and Digital Transformation at Flex. And Flex is the advanced end-to-end manufacturing partner of choice. It helps market leading brands design, source, build, deliver, and manage products that improve the world. In his role, John is responsible for IT operational delivery in support of day-to-day execution and onboarding new customers across Flex's global factory footprint. In addition, he's responsible for their initiative related to the Factory of the Future and the vision for that, which will be very interested to hear about as part of this talk. John has joined Flex in 2011 and held numerous roles within IT. Prior to Flex, he held various leadership positions at AerCap, an aviation leasing company headquartered in Dublin. John holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Applied Mathematics and from the University of Limerick. So welcome, John, and welcome back, David. Thank you.
All right, I'll kick us off. As you can see, we don't have a moderator, and it was intended to be that way. And I've known John all of about 5 minutes. We originally had planned to have Paul, one of his colleagues here, and unfortunately, Paul couldn't make it, so John and I have discussed briefly this morning. I think this is quite interesting that you've got a manufacturing executive and an IT executive on this panel, because it's two completely different perspectives on the same thing. And sometimes we're like cats and dogs. You know, the manufacturing guys want to do something, and the IT guys won't allow us to do it. So I think it's going to provide us with some really interesting discussion from the different perspectives. But you know, I'll start it off. You heard a little bit about the things that we've done, and I dipped into the playbook a little bit. But I want to go back to that 2015 time frame when Industry 4.0 was kicking off. And, you know, there was so much just excitement, uncertainty, and just energy that was being deployed, especially by the folks that were making sensors and all of the, the IoT connected devices that were going to, enable this grand Industry 4.0 transition. But from a practitioner side, nobody knew exactly what we were going to do. So we were going, 1,000 miles an hour in all different directions, but, at least we were moving. And it was really about general knowledge gain. What is out there? How is this going to transform the industry? And really that took place for about 2 years, and that was in Europe at the time, as I mentioned earlier, and then came back to the States in 2017 and found a lot of the same situation. So again, we took a pause and said, how are we going to take all of the technology that's out there, all of these things that are, just super sexy, new, exciting, and actually turn it into something that's going to provide an ROI? Because, in the last panel, we heard a lot about that tangible ROI that flows to the bottom line. And in a lot of cases, the discussion becomes about cost avoidance, risk avoidance. And cost avoidance is really difficult to justify with your CFO. So, it's how to really find what are the KPIs and the bottom line metrics that you are going to positively impact. So again, we started looking at it from where's the problems, where's the things that we need to fix. And then once we identified what those were, it was, okay, how do we approach this thing? And my approach was pretty simple. Whatever the issue was that we were looking at, how do we standardize the data? How do we visualize the data? Because if we could visualize the data, we could go to the next step of analyzing the data. Now, the analyzing the data didn't necessarily mean that we were doing it with AI, machine learning, or anything else, but we had it in a format. Visualization leads to the analyzing, and then we would go into, augmentation. how do we analyze at a deeper level? And ultimately, my goal was to get to automation. How do you take the data that's coming off of various shop floor equipment, and I really started exploring this on the machining side of the business in our powertrain. Because machining, it's all controlled, CNC machines, and we got, feedback that are coming through quality validations downline, whether it's scanning or whatever. And if we saw variations, how do we go back and have that machine automatically adjust for the output that it's generating? And we've done that in some cases. But, the playbook, we tried to simplify it so that we could communicate it, standardize, visualize, analyze, augment the data with AI tools, and then ultimately see if we can automate that process. And once we were able to do that, it really gave people a path of learning as well. What does it mean to standardize the data? What does it mean to get it in a AI-ready format? Well, education on that. What does it mean to actually visualize? And we use, I know I heard BI earlier, we use Tableau. And the number of Tableau users exploded. And then once people were able to visualize the data in Tableau, the analytics started moving forward. And then as the analytics got a little bit more, detailed, we set up a growth program for AI. It's more on the data science side, but in levels 3 and 4, you get into some coding. Levels 1 and 2 online courses. Levels 3 and 4, we actually partner with Vanderbilt to be able to go in and educate folks on utilizing Python, Copilot, on building analytics tools for whatever it is that they're looking at. And that mainly exists over on the supply chain side. But the playbook in general is, how do you communicate? How do you help people visualize what that journey is going to look like? What are the steps? And can you make it tangible and realistic from them from a practitioner's side? With that, John, I'll turn it over and give your perspective from an IT side.
Yeah, since David has explained everything about perfect data and everything that you require, I don't have to say much. But just to give the perspective from Flex, where I operate, okay, obviously, whereas when you look at a company like Nissan, right, obviously very heavily automated car manufacturing, a long history of decades from that perspective. When you look at what Flex does, right, we basically make other people's product. We make it in small quantities. We make pieces of the cars. We make some large, data center equipment, et cetera. So the scale and the difference of what we do is really interesting. So like to go back to the history of kind of, Industry 4.0, 2015, 2016, we can even go back a little bit further than that from the purpose of Flex.
Good news is
the focus initially in terms of what we now call AI, in terms of the preparation of data, was focused more in terms of the supply chain side of things, your standard ERP, finance type stuff, am I procuring, all of that type of area. And that's where we, in the time where David was saying, they were starting to head into that preventative maintenance, the analysis of, the PLCs, the data coming from machines. That's where we were focusing because, again, we're in 31 countries. We do an awful lot of, at least at that stage, a lot more labor-intensive activity, with the exception of printed circuit boards, where we will be a leading, company for that for decades at this particular point in time. So that's where our focus was then. In terms of when we look at, the evolution of what happened since, right? Yes, we settled in, we created a base layer of information, of data, but again, at a higher level. When we talk about manufacturing, that's really been more like the last 5 to 6 years. We've got some of our partners in the room that have been working that with us, right, from that point of view. So starting to tap into what we call in our industry, the front line, where we make printed circuit boards for a lot of our customers and for major products, a heavily automated space, a lot of equipment, a lot of machines. So the idea that you can drive data in that spot is really, really, very similar, right, from that perspective. Where it becomes interesting is more the conversation over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years is, how do we take a distributed manufacturing shop floor? We have a common tool that we use globally, but for decades, it's flexible. It allows the local people to do a little bit of their own, right? That, of course, corrupts your data, right? How do you get it all back together again? And that's where the challenge comes in from an overall underpinning piece. And it says, from a Flex perspective and from the IT perspective, that's where we've been working to try and resolve that piece in terms of prepping data for use case. I think where in terms of, shifting gears and kind of go from today backwards, we look inside in Flex now, we've got an AI strategy council led by our chief strategy officer. It's taken us about 2 years to put that kind of team together, if I put it from that perspective, from a concept where, the IT leadership team was trying to say, this is what we need to do. The various engineering groups, et cetera, were doing their OT side of the equation, right? Okay, how do we make friends? If I put it as simple as that, right? And then obviously the earlier references to ROI. How do we actually show that something's got value, right? Where we are at this stage looking backwards is we now have a small strategy team that focuses on helping everyone to, essentially price the deal. Is there value here, right? Can we get there quickly to understand if there's value? Okay, then, the challenge sits with me and others to say, do we have the data to take that proposition forward in an effective way? And I think it was referenced in one or two of the other points earlier on, is how quickly can we move? Because the historical piece, if I look back at the supply chain discussion in 14, 15, it was all about this monolith, get all of this data together, right? And there was probably 2 years of hidden work before value came out. That's no longer acceptable at an executive level, at a board level from that perspective. We've got to be faster in what we do. So I think that's where we've, triggered things, particularly more in the last 2 to 3 years, right, from that point. It's been an interesting journey, I think I'll put it this way. It's by no means over, right? I would say we're really only in the walk to jog phase, if I put it that way, from that point of view. And then the piece is, how do we take it forward? And that's going to be even the more entertaining part, I think, going forward, because how do we value it? Particularly, I'm not an OEM. We work in sub 6% margin limits, right? So you don't get to invest money very easily. So you actually have to make sure that there's a case to spend it, right, from that point of view. We're also influenced heavily by our customers, who are obviously some of the largest companies in the world that we manufacture for. So they actually influence what they would like to do. And it's an interesting dynamic because generally what they're after is they want their version of the data so they can take that with the other contract manufacturers and help them. They obviously want our knowledge. Our job is to try and make manufacturing more efficient. It's a very interesting thing. It's probably taken 2 to 3 years at an executive level to be able to filter that down to, realistically speaking, if it doesn't affect downtime or yield, it generally doesn't matter in the manufacturing world, right? Okay, those two things drill down into a whole pile of sub areas, but if it doesn't fit into that, I think what we've discovered over the last 2 to 3 years is there probably isn't scale value in that. Anything to add?
100% agree that with the downtime and the yield, you made a point about being a contract manufacturer and having the OEMs wanting the data to be able to potentially share. One of the interesting things is, I think from a large manufacturer, the playbook of implementing the AI, the tools, the deep analytics, we see the value in it. And we kind of got that established playbook. We know the direction that we're going, but whenever it comes to tie in with suppliers or potentially customers, it becomes extremely challenging. And given the unique position that Flex has within the market, I'm really interested on how that ties in, because there's certain things that I would like to see from our suppliers that would lead into some of my quality modeling on some of the major components, whether it's a powertrain or a vehicle component, so that I can incorporate it into my analytics. However, that's super difficult to do. How does that look in the world of Flex?
In our world, if I look at it from my perspective, where that generally plays out is, I mean, we've got a group that we call customer IT. They now come up with a fancy name that they're business unit IT, but essentially they're that technical liaison with the customer, right, from that point of view. So you end up with these very interesting conversations It starts quite often with, I need this piece of data in this format and this time, right, from that perspective. And it generally morphs into a conversation about, well, actually, what do you need it for, right, okay? Why do you need it? How frequently do you need it? And then what are you trying to solve? Because if we're not trying to solve for the same thing, ultimately, then all we're doing is giving you a data dump, right? We're not giving you a value data dump, right, from that perspective. It's the easy thing from my perspective on the technology side. Yeah, customers ask for something, give it to them, they go happy, right? The reality is we've got to try and give value with that data. That's what we're essentially being paid for, right, from that point of view. The hard part is connecting everything from like the customer, IT, OT, to us, and then even downstream to the supplier, right? Because when you look at not just manufacturing for a particular customer, but manufacturing for that customer in 5 different geographic locations, right? And the cultures and everything that comes with that, because you're not just dealing with the one person who sits in Silicon Valley or on the East Coast or in Europe somewhere. You're actually, you're dealing with the local connections to it.
Right.
And your data understanding changes, right? It dissipates. Or somebody's pet project here versus somebody's pet project there, right, from that point. And that is where, I think it's a really interesting thing as we look at data and AI in terms of how do we cross-jump that. We're a sub-supplier to, a Cisco, a Nissan, and various others, right, from that point of view. And then we've got sub-suppliers. We've got the equipment manufacturers. The more automation that comes in and, the reference to, manufacturing coming back to the US, you can imagine that, the key to that is a lot of automation in terms of that relative to labor prices. It's not everything isn't automation, but it's a key element to it, right? So, tying it all the way back into the suppliers that with that automation, custom automation, we make something for somebody. It's a component of or it's a finished product. Where it's a finished product, you tend to get to more automation, and therefore the demand on data to be able to support AI use cases for the customer, right, becomes more and more demanding from that perspective. It becomes a really interesting conversation because in the end, there are 4 or 5 major players in the industry that we're in, and how do we all play nicely together with data, with the customer, is an interesting topic. Because we might be the 80% supplier, they might be the 80% sub-supplier, right? But we're both trying to produce the same information,
right,
potentially off different equipment, right? Potentially obviously off different ERPs, different MES systems. The key piece, and this is at an exec level, I'm probably guilty of preaching this, more than my other execs want to hear, is this: unless we get the data in place, we aren't going to be able to succeed. That doesn't mean you've got to have perfect data, but you have to understand what data you need, and you have to be able to make it that sense. That's been, I think, the biggest education into what I would call the executive, the C layer, and even above, right? If we look at the last numbers, because, and I made this reference with David earlier on in terms of that, like, we go back into the generative side, right? OpenAI and the kick, we all came back after, one Christmas break or Thanksgiving break really in the US. Suddenly this thing had bubbled up and all our kids and college kids and environments like this were writing their papers, with a little bit of assistance, right? Okay, from that point. And of course, the very first thing you find yourself at a meeting and somebody says, why can't we do that, right? And that's where the huge, probably the next 12 months, was a lot of education about what's possible as opposed to, what might be possible. And that's where, the structure around executive, call it governance, that ultimately leads to the success within a company. What is the value that you see as a company? Obviously, we manufacture. The value is, let's focus in on what, essentially makes better profit for us and for our customers, right, from that point of view. And that comes down in manufacturing words from our perspective in terms of, downtime, quality, yield, right, from that point. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think, whenever I look at different aspects of the business and maybe how the playbook shifts a bit, your example of the quality information that maybe flows between the customer and the supplier, that's a tricky one because a lot of times the customer may want more data than what they need. The supplier is a bit reserved to be able to provide it because they think that the customer wants to get them in a gotcha moment
Yep.
on, for warranty, liability, or whatever it may be. So that one's very tricky, and we find ourselves navigating that one right now. And what is the right data, how to pass it? But whenever I compare and contrast that with the supply chain side of the business, and luckily I've got one foot in each one, and then on the commercial from a purchasing side. On the supply chain side, we've actually gone to our suppliers and say, we want to protect your supply chain business continuity. Because a lot of folks don't have the tools that we have for that visibility through the tier end. They don't have the ability to have, the high-level analytics to look for geopolitical disturbances or other things that may disrupt the supply chain. So our approach on that one is, here's the tool. Utilize it, and providing it for them. But what we get out of it is everything gets populated into it, so we get visibility throughout the supply chain, and they see tremendous value. On the quality side, it becomes a bit of a more of a contentious discussion.
Can you educate some more people in your neck to do the same? Because that would make my life a lot easier.
Yeah, well, we will try our best. But, again, it's a little bit of reservation on what the tools can actually do, and then getting to a mutual understanding of the why behind why you're doing it. I want quality data so I can protect my quality, not so I can get someone else in a gotcha moment. But that's very difficult for folks to understand. Whereas on the supply chain side, I want to protect my continuity of supply into the 10 plants that I manage, but also I want to protect their continuity as well, because any downtime or yield reduction or whatever disruption may come into that tier 1 or tier 2 supplier, I want to be able to protect their bottom line. I want to be able to make sure that they are making money, because when they are making money, I know that they're going to be a successful, ongoing entity that's going to be able to provide us the overall, materials that we need to do our job successfully. So I know that we've only got about 6 or so minutes left. What questions do you guys have from the audience? And I'm going to stand up because these wooden chairs are like being back in grade school.
David gave us
I'm manufacturing. I don't sit down very well. So go ahead.
David gave us a great example of using predictive maintenance on his robots as his first big win, I think, in applying AI in his factories. What about you, John? Do you have a big win that got you off and running? And
it's an area in terms of when I look at the areas that we're automated in. Okay, and as I said, there are some of our suppliers here. The key piece initially is connecting the data, but obviously think about us. We've got the similar type equipment making products for different people. So it's not quite, the data is different. So the scalability of it starts to become a challenge. But that is what we are doing in terms of this, because ultimately, how do I stop my downtime? But more importantly, I think where we're taking that, obviously, the nature of identifying downtime, yes, we can do that. The machine will tell you, the data will be there, right, from that perspective. Where we're trying to take the next step to is get to the point of, well, can I inform the operator, whoever it is in the factory, what they should be doing about that? I mean, David has referenced that earlier on in some of the examples. I mean, that's where we're looking in terms of taking the gen element of what's being added on top of it. I don't want to turn around and say preventative maintenance is table stakes, but in terms of manufacturing, it is table stakes, right, from that point of view. So now the question is, and shall we say, like, in line with the topic, the executive playbook on this, that's where the executives want to get us. Where do we drive that extra piece of information? How do we get to actionable information? How do we get to helping somebody? It's kind of a little bit on the on-the-job training. How do we support the lack of the 30-year experienced person over time?
That's right.
How do we bring that to it? And that's where the traditional AI/ML side of things, the predictive maintenance, which has been around for quite some time. How do we layer that into actually enabling information to get to the right person, to allow them to action there and then, right, from that point? That's where the focus is shifting to, right? But the predictive is, it's table stakes. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's table stakes, right?
And then the knowledge coming back from the layperson that goes and fixes the issue to make the model even more robust is also a challenge, as I outlined this morning. But again, that's one that we're faced with right now, and it's how do you structure it? How do you get that that ball rolling? Yes.
What can you talk a little bit about the criticality of the collaboration to build the AI roadmap for your organizations between like process stakeholders and IT?
That's where the dogs and cats come in. Yeah. So this was probably, and I'm gonna make sure I'm far enough away from John that he doesn't kick me. This was actually one of the biggest challenges that we had, because as we started exploring a lot of different proofs of concept, and proof of concepts were all done on the edge. So data security, not a problem, and we're doing some absolutely amazing things, and I was like, okay, let's scale this. Well, what we didn't do very well was include our friends from the ISIT side in the proof of concepts, because everything was running on the edge. No need. But as soon as we get to, hey, I need to put so many terabytes of data up into the cloud, I need to be able to have these connections. And that's when the ISIT guys were going, wait a minute. You can't do that. Well, why not? Well, cybersecurity, all the firewalls that we have in place, because our plants are completely independent of any outside direct connection. That's for cybersecurity, to make sure that we have business continuity. Well, to be able to filter the right amount of data into the cloud and be able to pull it back down when we need it, well, it required a lot of input from the ISIT side. And plus, one of the things that we really didn't understand from a manufacturing viewpoint is what we were asking for. Because we have servers, we have the cloud servers, we have all of these different things. That's, it's there. It's free, isn't it? No. Whenever you ask to put all of this data up, well, here's the price tag. So there was a lot of education back and forth on what is the true cost? What is the capability? Why is it, and questions coming from the ISIT side, do you really need this data? Is this what you need? And then we start filtering out, which led to better standardization of the data that we were collecting and what we were actually going to use it for. But the collaboration is super important. Now we have, a great relationship. I would say in 2017 and 2018, we were just working against each other. But that working against each other is actually education, us understanding the ISIT world better, them understanding what it is that we were trying to do from a manufacturing supply chain viewpoint. And luckily, within the region, the CFO, regional CFO, is also my counterpart in ISIT. So he has CFO role, and he's also the ISIT guy. So that really helps us in the collaboration from the finance side, the ISIT, and then the manufacturing. But early days, it was very confrontational, because we were wanting to move at manufacturing speed, and they were wanting to make sure that we were, kept safe. So I don't know what it was like in your world.
We have the same basic challenges, obviously, from that perspective. The other piece that I'd add in terms of our dynamic is, you try to encourage innovation. You try to encourage people to work where they are, right, from that side. And obviously in our world, where we've got somewhere around 900 customers, there's a lot of input in terms of what do you, can you make my particular production line in this particular factory better? So we've got a lot of, engineering innovation going on. So we have this extra piece, apart from the piece of, no, you can't just run an LLM and stick data into it wherever you like kind of conversations, right, okay? We have the piece, how do we organize ourselves so that we don't have 100 different ideas, 80% of them which are the same, right? And then how do you ask somebody who wants to be innovative, look, you need to take a slight pause. We need to try and get this together. We need to try and figure out what the most important areas are. And that created a lot of friction, right? I would say, we probably have it settled down probably about 18 months at this stage. But again, it's like there was 2-3 years of, why am I being stopped? Why can I not do this? And it was more to do with, in our case, not so much Yes, we had the fight over, sorry, how many dollars is in your budget that you want this amount of data and you want all of that. But more to the point of, well, how do I take your good idea, this good idea, and this good idea, all of which are in the same space, and somehow to get you to work together? And that's the interesting challenge as well. And that's where I think we've spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of years corralling that, what we now label Flex Future Factory. I mean, it used to be called Industry.0, it used to be called Digital Factory, it used to be called many things. But internally, there's been a huge amount of branding, if I put it as simple as that, over the last 18 months on this type of concept to try and bring the brain power and the ideas together. Obviously, we have to support it from a technology perspective, right? So there is the natural friction and budget control, but that's all it is in terms of that. I think everybody's now more or less on the same page after a few years of, is it me or you who gets to go to the CFO and ask for money, right?
One thing I will add to that is in 17 and 18, the manufacturing ISIT team actually reported to me as VP of engineering. And because of these battles that we were having with the larger regional ISIT function, Nissan Digital, I said, you know, the best thing that we can do is actually restructure ourselves. Because in manufacturing, you like to keep everything close and under your control as much as possible. I was able to have enough foresight to say, you know what, having manufacturing ISIT under the leadership of process engineering and vehicle production engineering is not a good thing anymore. I actually broke them out of my organization, put them in Nissan Digital. And actually, that migration of their shop floor knowledge into Nissan Digital was one of the best things that started breaking down barriers. So, and these were people that were speaking the same IT language, but also with the understanding of how manufacturing worked being injected into the discussion. It started speeding things along.
Thank you very much, David and John.
Do you want to take one question? I don't know if we got.
Perfect. Sam Rosen, Silver AI Strategies. I'm just curious about your cost forecast and how you think of that, obviously, as the amount of data in the cloud
I've
goes
been thinking
up,
about too lately.
as
It's like
the
like the way that
prices reach some stability or not, depending on the power cost, etc. I
they're going
wonder
with
how
the
you think about that, and if is it different
department.
on
It's
the
like
training side and inference side? Thanks.
In terms of, from our perspective, right, cost, it kind of sounds simple, but cost is cost, and it comes back to the ROI piece. It's about understanding where the cost is going, you know, where we're going to store the data, how we're going to store the data, which partner do we want to use, and, you know, we use most of them, right? We also manufacture for them on other sides as well, so there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship in terms of how we get on with it. So in terms of, we have, you know, wearing the IT hat, we obviously have to keep under certain numbers and all the usual things. So within that, we factor and we forecast forward what we think we're going to do. But then where, you know, anything that's kind of major in the AI space going forward, that gets looked at as a separate activity. It's why we put the AI Council together, because we know it's something that's going to mushroom over the next, you know, 1, 3, 5 years from that perspective. The cost of data is less a worry anymore. The cost of compute is where it's going to be interesting. Right? And since we make some of the product that powers that compute, we have some level of understanding where it's going to go. But it's really, you know, use case basis, but it's definitely going to be where companies spend a bit more money than we're spending at the moment.
Seems like
going forward.
people
Similar to
started.
us. I mean, it's all about
It
the
seems like
ROI.
we started
So
hearing about
obviously the data storage piece
people
comes
coming
into
early
the overall
and
calculation. But also, we're looking at what can we do on the edge where it's a quick decision. We don't need the data to be stored for months at a time. You know, we got tons of regulatory elements where we need that data long term, but there are certain things that is just a quick decision on the edge that I don't need the data. For instance, we have cameras that are in certain areas of the plant where PPE, personal protective equipment, must be worn. I don't need that data stream to the cloud.
That's not
So the
right.
cameras that are there that are saying, does that person have on the appropriate headgear? Do they have on safety glasses? Do they have on the protective sleeves or gloves? Well, that's just a simple flag once it's analyzed and sent to the supervisor who may be 75 to 100 yards away. They can't be there all the time. I don't need to keep that data. It's analyzed on the edge and then it goes away. It's just overridden. So again, it's use case by use case and trying to optimize that in the cost equation to make sure that we get the right ROI.
It's a part of the conversation, again, from being the contract manufacturer with our customer base, you're back into what do you need us to retain? What do we need to retain, right? And the more and more use cases we're looking at, the quicker turn, churn and burn is a kind of phrase I've used in terms of, if I don't need the data beyond today, beyond 5 minutes, beyond tomorrow, let's not have it, but let's make that conscious decision, because there is also a tendency to hold on to data that you just don't need, right? And if you don't need it, you don't have to spend for it.
That's right.
Thanks very much,
Okay.
David and John.
Thank you.
Cheers, sir.